This is Illinois in Focus, a production of America's Talking Network. I'm Greg Bishop. Coming up, we'll review the week's top stories about the governor's proposed budget, the latest on litigation against Illinois' gun and magazine ban, and the ongoing criminal case involving utilities and former House Speaker Michael Madigan. We'll also get commentary from the Center Square publisher Chris Krug and executive editor Dan McCaleb about those stories and more. That's ahead with Illinois in Focus, a production of America's Talking Network. Listen to all our podcasts at americastalking.com. I'm Greg Bishop.
Hello, I'm Donna Jeske.
And I'm Paul Jeske.
We're family farmers raising corn and soybeans in Grundy County, Illinois.
It might be hard to believe, but 96% of the farms in Illinois are owned and operated by family farmers just like us.
Our job is to grow the healthiest, most affordable food around to feed our family and yours.
Meet more farmers like us at www.watchusgrow.org/corn.
A message from the Illinois Corn Marketing Board.
This is Illinois in Focus, a production of America's Talking Network. I'm Greg Bishop. Here's some of the top stories from the past week. Governor J.B. Pritzker is focusing on early education in his budget proposal. Kevin Bessler has details.
Pritzker gave a State of the State and budget address Wednesday and asked for $250 million for early education, including a $75 million block grant that he says will create 5,000 preschool spots for children in Illinois.
Smart Start Pre-K is a 4-year plan that will allow us to give access to preschool to every 3 and 4-year-old in Illinois.
Pritzker also wants to spend $100 million on MAP grants, which he says in the end will boost the state's economy.
We can make history. Together with Pell Grants, virtually everyone at or below median income in Illinois can go to community college tuition free.
The education funding is part of a $49.6 billion spending proposal, an increase of over $3 billion from last year. I'm Kevin Bessler.
Meanwhile, the governor's calling out what he calls carnival barkers, while critics say his plan for the state is a woke wish list. The governor proposed a new spending plan of nearly $50 billion, including increased funding for public education and other programs.
Yet it's all meaningless if we become a nation that bans books from school libraries about racism suffered by Roberto Clemente and Hank Aaron, and tells kids that they can't talk about being gay.
Immediately following the speech, Republican State Representative Adam Niemerg criticized the governor's priorities with more than $2.7 billion in proposed new spending and said more focus needs to be on growing the state's economy.
It's a woke wish list is really what we're dealing with here. And, the governor had the audacity again to call us carnival barkers, but he's running the carnival and he's driving the carnival off the leftist cliff.
Meanwhile, the governor offering that budget proposal in the coming fiscal year includes investments in education, and it's getting mixed reviews. Andrew Hensel has more.
The governor's budget proposal includes an 11% increase compared to last year's plan for preschool and K-12 education funding. State Senator Terry Bryant says the governor is spending his way into a tax increase for Illinois.
We cannot spend all the money that he is proposing because in essence, what it's going to do is force another tax increase. I would say the governor did not get the progressive income tax increase that he wanted, so now his plan is to make sure that he spends us into a tax increase.
State Senator L.G. Sims said Pritzker is taking the right approach when investing in the state's youth.
So proud of the proposal the governor laid out. We can't just only address the end cause of crime, which is the crime itself. We've got to address the root causes. So you see investments in early childhood. You see investments in education.
Pritzker's proposal spends nearly $50 billion in state funds. I'm Andrew Hensel.
And with the threat of a possible recession on the horizon, some are worried that the governor's proposed budget is trending toward future tax hikes. Kevin Bessler has more.
The $49.6 billion budget is an increase of nearly $3 billion from last year. The governor says his budget includes less spending this year.
I've been very conservative about revenue estimates. And so going into the next year, we're actually proposing less revenue and lower spending overall than we had in FY23.
House Minority Leader Tony McCaleb says the numbers don't add up.
Here we are at $2.7 billion in new spending and revenues down $1.42 billion. And those are his numbers that he provided. Where are we going to get this additional funding? It's certainly not sustainable for new programs.
Pritzker's budget proposal includes a nearly $1 billion boost for education. That includes allotting $250 million toward early childhood education with increased pay for child care workers and added preschool slots. I'm Kevin Bessler.
3 federal lawsuits against Illinois' gun ban saw movement Monday as a federal judge ordered a response from the state to show each and every item banned. In the Southern District of Illinois, 4 cases are pending. One's from federal firearms licensees of Illinois. Plaintiffs in that case filed a motion for a preliminary injunction last week. In other cases, federal judge Stephen McGlynn ordered state defendants to provide illustrative examples of each and every item banned under state law. Thomas Magg, who brought the state-level case that was transferred to federal court, said the judge's order will make it difficult for the state to comply.
Because the ban is so all-encompassing and uses a great many vague terms that I'm not even sure that exactly what is banned, but then that's probably why Judge McGlynn ordered the state to do that, so that we can find out exactly what we're arguing about. The plaintiffs in my case remain extremely confident and that we're going to succeed on the merits of this case. This statute never should have been passed in the first place. And applying the Bruin analysis, we believe that the days of Illinois' magazine and firearms ban are numbered, and the number is not very large.
Meanwhile, the state's motion to delay responding to a different federal lawsuit against the gun ban has been denied by that federal judge. There are 4 cases pending, and the state's already been ordered to show each and every item banned in 3 of those lawsuits. In a separate federal case challenging the ban on guns and parts, Todd Vandermeide read out the judge's order issued Thursday denying the state's motion to delay a response. The order notes that the Illinois Attorney General is already required to respond in 3 other cases.
Although these cases have not been consolidated, the court wishes to keep them on a similar timetable. So there is no hardship by denying this extension. As such, defendants shall respond to 28 first motion for preliminary injunction on or before March 2nd.
Nearly 5 weeks into the ban, Vandermeide said the hardship is being felt by many.
The gun shops and the citizens of Illinois that are suffering the most because they can't acquire stuff, the shops can't sell stuff. I think that it's the gun shops and the Illinois residents that are being harmed the most at this juncture.
The judge said in his order Thursday the 4 cases have not been consolidated, but he wants to maintain a similar schedule. The state has until February 28th to respond to Magg's case. In the case brought by the Illinois State Rifle Association, the state has until March 1st to respond, and March 2nd to respond in the case brought by the National Shooting Sports Foundation. And when the myriad cases against Illinois' gun ban are resolved remains unclear, but what is certain is taxpayers are footing the bill. Illinois' gun ban has been in effect since January 10th. And since then, a 4th temporary restraining order was issued Friday, the 2nd one for Effingham County. While the state hasn't put out much of a defense in such state-level cases since the 5th Circuit Court of Appeals upheld the 1st Effingham County temporary restraining order, there's still staff with Illinois Attorney General's office funded with tax dollars putting hours of work in. In the federal cases, Illinois State Rifle Association Executive Director Richard Pearson said taxpayers are in a tough spot and it's aggravating.
They're defending the suit with our money and we're suing them with our money. So they don't have anything to lose, but of course we do. So we have to keep pressing forward just on the financial end of it.
And an effort's underway to combine 4 state-level challenges to Illinois' gun and magazine ban. Earlier in the week, Attorney Thomas DeVore filed with the Illinois Supreme Court a motion to consolidate his 3 cases from Effingham and White counties into the case from Macon County.
When you bring them into one case, then you only have to do discovery one time. Other depositions that we might do of the speaker or of the president would be identical. So there's an efficiency there.
All cases have temporary restraining orders in place, but only for named plaintiffs. DeVore said even if consolidation happens, which he says is likely, the statewide injunction against the law won't happen until the case is fully resolved.
The only time there's going to be an injunction that might apply statewide is when we get to the end of the case and get in front of the Supreme Court of the state of Illinois.
For several federal cases under a single judge, there could be a consolidation there, but that motion has not been filed. Those are the top stories from the past week for Illinois. Find more online at americastalking.com. Coming up for Illinois in Focus, commentary from the Center Square publisher Chris Krug and executive editor Dan McCaleb. This is Illinois in Focus, a production of America's Talking Network. I'm Greg Bishop.
Freedom and liberty are important to all of us in Illinois, from Rockford to Carbondale, from Quincy to Decatur. If you're looking for civil, intellectual conversations with those shaping the future of freedom, try the Future of Freedom podcast with me, Scott Bertram. We speak with leaders across the country in the greater conservative and libertarian movements. In-depth conversations about where the next intellectual battles will happen across the country. It's the Future of Freedom podcast. Find it at americastalking.com or wherever you get your podcasts.
Hey, and welcome back to the Illinois in Focus podcast. This is the Crosstalk segment, commentary powered by the Center Square. I'm Chris Krug, publisher of the Center Square, president of the Franklin News Foundation. I'm joined by my friend and colleague, Dan McCaleb. He's the executive editor of the Center Square and the vice president of news for Franklin News Foundation. Dan, how are you, pal?
I'm doing well, Chris, and you?
Good. I'm doing really, really well. There's lots going on in Springfield for you and I to talk about. I want to kind of jump right into it. And of course, the big news this week is, the state of the state and the budget address, a consolidated event that took place on Wednesday. We're taping this on Thursday, February 16th in the morning. Certainly, there'll be some stories that are going to develop out of the budget itself. But why don't we jump into it and talk about first of all, the size of it. It's massive. I mean, we're talking about a budget that is pushing up against $50 billion here in Illinois. I want to say that when J.B. Pritzker took over as governor 5 years ago, the prior year's budget was like 41. Does that sound about right?
Just above $41 billion. So in the 4 years since Governor Pritzker took office, of course, he's entering his second term, or he just entered his second term. And now he's proposing just shy of $50 billion budget. So doing the math in my head, and you correct me if I'm wrong, because you have a better, you can calculate this stuff better than I am, but that's about a 17% increase since Governor Pritzker first took office 4 years to what he's proposing for the next fiscal year, starting July.
Yeah, 1st. It's pretty easy math. I mean, it's nearly 20%. When you go from 41 to 50, and like for the benefit of accuracy, yeah. I mean, that's a lot. I mean, what's in it?
There's lots of new spending proposals, some of which you could argue are noble if we had the money to spend, and we would continue to have the money to spend on these recurring expenses. But that's the problem, and that's why Illinois' taxes are so high, and they seem to continue going up. One is pre-K education programs across the state, particularly in rural areas where maybe lower income families and their young children get left behind. He wants to spend an additional $572 million on these early learning programs. He wants to dump another $219 million in higher education. This despite enrollment declines almost universally across our state university system. The budget is more than $2 billion above what we spent in this current, or that we are spending in this current fiscal year that ends June 30th. Every year under Governor Pritzker, the budget goes up by billions. And the question is, how is that sustainable? Of course, Pritzker touts that he's gotten the state's finances under control since he took office. But let's face it, he's been given a bunch of billions and billions of dollars in federal COVID-19 aid, and that's what's been used to essentially pad the budget. But that's money's going away. So how on earth are Illinois taxpayers going to be able to afford a $50 billion budget that will only go up probably over the next 3.5 years of Pritzker's term of course, Republicans and taxpayers are worried the only way this is sustainable is through further tax increases. And as we know, Illinois residents already pay among the highest taxes in the nation. So it's concerning.
Well, and I think that those concerns are reasonable. I mean, the one thing that, like, I think from, especially now, with inflation on us and in meaningful ways. I mean, like, obviously, the cost of eggs, it's something pretty much everybody buys. Yes, they did come down in the last week. And it's interesting that there were a lot of sales on eggs for some reason. But over the course of the last 18 months, the price of eggs has gone up 70%. So, I mean, and in some places around the country, but I'm just focusing on Illinois, it's gone up more. So I bring that up for one reason. If you have an income and your income is steady, you go to work, you bring home a check, the checks are the same amount every week, which I believe is the way the vast majority of Illinoisans are paid. Certainly, if you're a small, mid-sized business owner, you might have weeks where you have no check. You might have some weeks where you have a big check. You might have some weeks where you take what you can take, and you keep the business running. But the vast majority of people have what amounts to be not necessarily a fixed income, but a pretty stable income. During inflation and over the past year, a lot of Illinoisans have had to make a choice of either borrow from their 401ks or out of their savings or both to maintain a standard of living that was a sustainable standard of living, right? Not living extravagantly, but, bringing into their home the things that they needed for their family, things to eat, clothes to wear, shoes on their feet, coats, things like that. The state of Illinois and the state of Illinois just does not operate, the way that I think that the taxpayer might think they would, could, or should, because they just keep growing. It's not like, when we're being asked to tighten our belts, they're going out and buying new belts because they've gone from a size 48 waist to a size, actually, let's just make it for real. They've gone from a size 41 waist to a size 50 waist. So the state budget is getting fatter, and there's no belt tightening there. We never hear about cuts during these budget unveilings. All we hear about is the great programs, and then we never hear about who's going to pay for these things. But the reality of it is, we're all being asked to pay for them, in different ways. And as you said, it's kind of unsustainable, because it's like, where does it end?
Well, in Illinois, it doesn't seem to ever end. President Biden has said in weeks past that the wages have outpaced 40-year high inflation during his administration. But at the center square, where, of course, we cover Illinois exhaustively, we also cover all 50 states. And out of our Washington, D.C. bureau, we cover the federal government. We fact-checked President Biden on that, and that's just simply not true. Wages have not kept up with inflation. And then you've got a majority of economists around the country also saying we're heading into a recession this year. A recession generally means lost jobs, higher unemployment, fewer people paying income taxes. So this windfall in federal money the state got during COVID-19, not only is that money going away, there's the potential for this recession where people are going to lose their jobs, not pay income taxes, have less money to spend on groceries and other things. That means fewer sales tax dollars. So this budget is really putting taxpayers in a bind in the state of Illinois, in my opinion, because who knows what this recession is going to bring and what it's going to mean to state finances.
Yeah. Well, I mean, and one of the other things that was in there, of course, is we establish a rainy day fund, which is a good thing. And, in states that have surpluses, having a rainy day fund that's available for, things that might happen, disasters or, if COVID would have been handled as a manageable event, and you and I will have to talk more about that, over time. Of course, this, story that Casey Harper published today from DC about Anthony Fauci and what he had to say about the effectiveness of COVID therapies is worth unpacking. But we're trumpeting the fact that we have a $2.3 billion rainy day fund. But I mean, let's do the math on that. I mean, if it's a $50 billion budget and you have a $2.3 billion rainy day fund, congratulations, you have a 2-week surplus to operate all of this circus that we've built in Springfield, that wants to fund everything, doesn't examine at a line item level things that it could cut. We just keep adding on to this thing. And it's kind of like, that film that Mike Judge made years ago, that Idiocracy, where the buildings just start to topple over. I mean, it just feels rudderless.
Well, and it has been for a very long time. I don't think the current General Assembly, or past General Assemblies for that matter, or Governor Pritzker are forward thinking. They want to. They've got all these brilliant ideas to improve the lives of certain segments of the population, without keeping in mind the bigger picture of what it means for taxpayers. Of course, we've reported exhaustively on the loss of population in Illinois. Every year for 9 consecutive years, the state has lost population to out-migration, meaning people are moving out of Illinois. So that, of course, means fewer taxpayers left to pick up the burden of government expenses. And there's no reason to believe that trend's not going to continue. And one of the main reasons people cite when they move out of Illinois, 2 reasons. High taxes. Cannot afford to pay Illinois' high taxes. The second has to do with corruption and the inefficiency of state and local governments across the state. Of course, we're going to talk about the Madigan corruption investigation a little bit later today. But we've had so many state elected officials indicted and charged and convicted, and local elected officials indicted, charged, and convicted of corruption-related crimes. The two go hand in hand. The high spending, the high taxes, the corruption. I don't blame Illinois taxpayers for completely losing faith in their government officials.
So, Dan, wanted to add this in, and so we're just sort of talking about things related to Springfield, and in this budget itself. I mean, there's I don't believe that there's a change, that we're still inside of this budget. For every dollar that we send to Springfield, about 25 cents of that goes to tackle pension obligations. What's new on the pension front?
Well, interestingly, at least we could say lawmakers in Springfield have ignored the pension crisis in Illinois for years. It's like an afterthought. Don't even bring it up. As you mentioned, 25% of every dollar that goes to Springfield goes to pay for pensions of retired folks who aren't providing any services anymore to Illinois residents. So that's 25% of the budget that is not going to operating expenses in the state to provide services to current residents and taxpayers. It's going to pay past obligations, services that we're no longer getting from these folks. At least for the first time in years, last week they held lawmakers, a House committee held its first hearing on pension debt. They're having a second hearing later today, which you'll be able to read about at thecentersquare.com later this afternoon. But at least they're holding hearings on the pension crisis. But the thing is, they're not proposing any solutions to it. They're just asking, well, how bad is it now? They're not saying, okay, what do we need to do to right set our pension debts? Illinois is among the worst funded pension systems. There are 5 state pension systems for teachers, for K through 12 teachers, for university workers, for general state employees, for lawmakers themselves, and for the judges. The teachers and the university workers and the general state employees are by far the worst funded, or the most funded in terms of dollars, more than $200 billion underfunded. And if we can't figure that out, we're not going to be able to figure out our budget overall. But at least they're talking about it. I don't see any solutions, though, being pitched by the Democratic majority in the legislature.
Yeah, and I mean, I don't. It's look. Here's the thing. It's not a problem for them. It's a problem for the people who live in the state of Illinois, and depending on where you live, it's a problem to a varying degree. But
Yeah.
I mean, we all have. If you own a home, whether you escrow for taxes or you pay your own taxes, we all get the summaries. We all get the bills. That articulate sort of what's on there. I mean, I have mine on my desk for this year. Mine, I think, I'm going to count this real quick. I think mine has like 17 different taxing districts on it.
Unreal. Yeah.
And then when you take a look at it, I mean, and really examine it, it's like how many of these lines where the service, so what we're paying for, our contribution to the operation of the business, and then what we're paying for on the pension side of that entity, where there actually are some lines where the pension obligation is greater than the actual service. This is not a run at public service, employees, people who work in the public sector. We value what you do, especially police, fire, teachers. But my God, you have to look at this and consider, like, how can this be that we're spending more to retire you or for you in retirement than we're paying for the service that is the good back to the community? And that just doesn't make sense.
Yeah. I'm now in my almost 20th year of covering local and state government in Illinois. This goes back to our newspaper days, Chris. And 20 years ago, when I entered Illinois and started covering state government and local government in Illinois, guess what? Pensions were a crisis. We're 20 years later, and nothing's been done. They put some surface legislation in place, but it's done nothing to lower the pension debt on the backs of Illinois taxpayers.
No, and obviously it's gotten worse. But part of that's the size of the government. So if there's no reduction in force in this budget, and there's no cuts, there's no consideration. I mean, that's where it really gets insulting, because we're just adding, and that go back to that reference I made to Idiocracy, that Mike Judge film. It makes me a little bit bananas. Hey, let's move over and talk about guns if we can, because we haven't done that for an entire week, you and me. Am I an outlaw yet, or am I not an outlaw yet?
Well, you're not a plaintiff in any of the lawsuits, so and not knowing what kind of guns you own, you very well could be an outlaw. I hate to say it, but in the last week, so we've had of course, the gun ban on more than 170 semi-automatic rifles and pistols and magazines of certain capacities have been banned in the state. And lawsuits, probably close to a dozen lawsuits have been filed about it. Well, in this past week, a fourth district court, state district court in Illinois has issued a temporary restraining order against enforcement of the ban, saying it's unconstitutional. The attorney who's filed several of these suits, Thomas DeVore, is looking to consolidate three of his lawsuits where he's already won TROs. Thomas DeVore, of course, is the former GOP attorney general candidate who has been a thorn in the Pritzker administration side since the beginning of COVID-19, when he started challenging all these mandates. You mentioned a few minutes ago the Dr. Fauci story. Maybe we'll save that one for next week. For example, the vaccines they knew they weren't near as effective as they were selling to the American people. Anyway, Thomas DeVore wants to consolidate his lawsuits into a single state lawsuit. You still have pending federal lawsuits where there have been no rulings yet. But so far, every court that's weighed in on the measure has said it's unconstitutional. So there's still work to be done. This will ultimately, in Illinois, be decided by the Illinois Supreme Court. But then there's all these separate federal lawsuits that are still pending that I don't see how they can rule any differently. But we'll see. This is the court system can obviously be slow to get through the process, but there have been some expedited hearings, so we'll see.
Well, and I appreciate that update. I mean, this is now feels like it's somewhat slow moving because it is. This has now been sort of it's been a matter for the court from the instant that this was passed during lame duck prior to the beginning of this legislative session. So in January, we're about a month. I guess we're about a month into this, and it doesn't seem like it's sitting. For some, it doesn't seem like it's moving fast enough. But I guess it's about process. And the one thing that you and I talked about earlier, before we started taping the show, was just this is not unique to the United States. This conversation is not unique to the United States. And in other states where these kinds of measures have been introduced, they've not stood up to the legal challenges. The Second Amendment has prevailed. Nonetheless, I mean, the state of Illinois, in the Democrat supermajority in the state legislature and the Governor Pritzker, they don't care. They're that this bill that's been passed, which I don't think it's going to. I mean, I don't understand how it could win, right? Right. So we're going to waste time, effort, and energy around this as a state. It's going to be expensive, and I think they're going to lose.
Yeah, and remember, there is a taxpayer cost to this. Every single court case that's out there, the Attorney General's office the Attorney General's office is siding with the General Assembly and the governor, saying the law is constitutional. Every single court hearing, there's prep work. Of course, you have to attend the court hearings, and these court hearings are in counties around the state. You have to file motions. Then there's appeals. You have to file appeals because they've lost all 4 state district court hearings. And then ultimately it'll go to the Illinois Supreme Court. Federally, it might, unless federal courts in other states, which you've mentioned, there's pending federal cases in New York and Maryland and California, where lower courts have also ruled against these gun bans. So, depending on what there's so much time and money spent defending Illinois' law. It's going to be a burden on taxpayers, another burden on taxpayers. But it is what it is. I'm no lawyer. I don't see how Illinois' gun ban upholds constitutional muster, since 4 courts have already said it doesn't. And remember, this is Illinois, where you have probably more left judges than right judges. Although the counties where these did have are more conservative areas of the state. But it's a time and a tax suck. Yeah, the other thing you have to remember, it's not just gun rights owners that are affected, or gun owners, Second Amendment supporters who are affected by this. There are small businesses that are getting hammered by this too. Gun stores across the state have had to take these banned weapons, these banned cartridges off of their shelves, put them into a locked storage space, and they're unable to conduct business when it comes to selling those kinds of things. Small businesses who employ the majority of people in Illinois are being impacted heavily by this ongoing gun ban and the litigation involved with it.
Yeah, no, and that's a good point. I mean, there are laws have consequences, and not all the consequences are visible to everyone. So, I think that's an important part of this. I mean, the people that are trapped in the middle of this, the SMBs, the men and women that own gun stores, I think are really vexed right now. One of the stores that I frequent that's here in McHenry County, right before the gun ban, legislation was passed, they had a blowout sale on magazines that were non-conforming. I mean, an absolute blowout sale. And so they probably sold these things at or below cost, which hurts, right? So anyhow, hey, let's move on. I want to talk about Madigan, and I want to talk about ComEd. We had talked about Michael McLean, former Madigan confidant, and what he was trying to, legally maneuver in his case, where he didn't want certain information to be exposed to the jury. And now, former ComEd CEO Ann Primagori doesn't want the jury to know how much money she was paid, why she left her job, her political campaign contributions, or anything about the $200 million that ComEd paid in penalty as a consequence of the federal bribery probe that ComEd was involved in, with Michael Madigan also being involved in. And so that would be kind of like, I think, some key pieces of information that the jury wouldn't have access to that are core to their understanding in this case. So I guess you can ask, but what's the likelihood that you're going to get if you're Ann Primagori in this case?
Well, first, let me just say, how easy is it for a defense attorney to successfully defend your client if you can eliminate much of the evidence against your client, which is essentially what the former ComEd CEO wants to do in this trial. Of course, ComEd a few years ago, as part of this sweeping federal corruption probe into longtime former House Speaker Michael Madigan, admitted its guilt, admitted that some of its employees bribed Speaker Madigan, or those close to Speaker Madigan, to get favorable legislation to the utility passed through the state legislature. Now, the former ComEd CEO, who federal prosecutors allege, and she's been charged with bribery, she denies it, so she's not guilty until proven so. She has an upcoming trial, but in this trial, as you mentioned, she does not want the jury to hear how much she was paid as ComEd CEO, saying that would bias the jury because they'll have it out for higher income people. She does not want to know why she left her job. Technically, she was forced out of her job after ComEd looked into these federal investigations and found that, at least on their end, she was doing something wrong, so they had to get rid of her. She does not want to know about her political campaign contributions, something that we're looking into, by the way. Who did she and ComEd donate money to during the about 10 years that this investigation was undergoing? She doesn't want the jury to hear that ComEd essentially admitted guilt and agreed to pay the federal government $200 million in fines because of their participation in this alleged bribery scheme. And so they filed a briefing this week saying that the court needs to exclude all of this evidence because it would be biased against the defendant. Well, guess what? If you're involved in criminal wrongdoing, and I don't know that the former CEO was, certainly federal prosecutors allege that she was, but if you're going to wipe out all the state's evidence, all the federal government's evidence, what's the point? I don't see it happening. I don't see a judge.
I'm with you on that. It's tricky, right? Because ComEd preemptively accepts, this massive fine and admits to wrongdoing, right? As part of it.
Yes.
So now, there's the question of who was the architect of that wrongdoing? And that's ultimately, is that not the framework of the Department of Justice's case against Ann Primagori. So now, because like, it's always the question is like, are companies people and are people companies? And, I guess you can't have it both ways, can you? That if the wrongdoing, is occurring inside of a company and it was orchestrated or involved people who were directly requesting it or overseeing it, then, I think it's the public's right to know. And so, and part of that public in this case would be this, this jury of her peers who would have to process that information and make a determination as to whether or not she was or wasn't intimately involved in the things that, that her company has admitted they've done.
Here's a money quote from the motion filed by defense attorneys in the case. Quote, allowing the jury to learn of ComEd's agreement to pay $200 million would severely prejudice defendants because jurors may conclude that ComEd thought that its officers, including its former CEO, committed a very serious crime if they paid a $200 million fine. You think?
Yeah. Well, I love it when people say you think. Yeah. I mean, it's not good. And if that gets excluded, then, I mean, for crying out loud, come on now.
I don't see it happen, but again, I'm not an attorney, so.
Yeah, no. You do play one on TV. I got one last thing for you, and we didn't have a chance to talk about this at all. But the Bears closed they closed the deal on the Arlington Heights racetrack yesterday. Now around midday yesterday, and so it looks like they're going, or this is the best misdirection that the Bears have orchestrated in many years. If they could do something like this on the field, they would possibly win more than 3 games in a season. But it looks like this is going down. I saw the mayor of Arlington Heights last night in a television interview. I think it was on WFLD on Channel 32, Fox 32 in Chicago, saying that that yes, there are financial considerations that are on the table. So any thoughts at all on the Bears to Arlington Heights at this point?
Well, even though the Bears say that when they closed and officially bought the Arlington Park racetrack in Arlington Heights, closed on it yesterday. Even though they did that, they say this does not definitively mean that a stadium is going to be constructed and the Bears will move there. But I'm not buying that. I think it's inevitable. At this point, it's just a matter of what the details are. Of course, the Bears and Arlington Heights and the state is going to be involved in whether taxpayer money is going to be used to help subsidize the stadium. We're not just talking about a stadium. We're talking about a business district surrounding the stadium. And the Bears have said that they will need help sustaining the business district in the form of tax rebates, property tax incentives, and things like that. So I do think, in the Bears' mind, it's going to happen if they can pull the right strings with local and state government officials. Now, the details matter here, particularly for taxpayers.
Yeah, I agree. That would not be a feather in the cap of Chicago Mayor Lori Lightfoot, would it?
No, she's been fighting to get the Bears to stay in the city of Chicago. To this point, it seems like she's losing every step of the way. I don't know what far-flung ideas she might have to try and reverse what looks like the trend of them moving to Arlington Heights, but I don't think it's going to be enough.
Yeah, and she is not doing so hot in the polls. Of course, we've got municipal elections that are they a month away? What's the municipal election day?
Yeah, it's later this month. It's a primary.
Right.
Yeah. And it's likely that because there's so many candidates, it's likely no one candidate is going to get more than 50% of the vote. So there will be a runoff. But yeah, Lori Lightfoot might not even make the runoff. She's in that top 2 or 3 in polling tier of candidates or whatever. So she'd have to finish in the top 2 to make the runoff. But I think that's in question.
Yeah, I saw like the former CEO of Chicago Public Schools, Paul Vallis, was like far and away the leader, thus far based on polling. And Cook County Commissioner Brandon Johnson was in the mix there, and then Lightfoot was right. She and Brandon Johnson were kind of like, kind of neck and neck there, but like at 16% each. Vallis is like at 31%. Maybe the last poll I saw. So that'll be interesting. Yeah. Well, Dan, I appreciate it. It's always good to catch up with you. I know we kind of covered a whole bunch of different things, and appreciate you going around the horn with me. Pleasure.
Same here. Stay warm. Get your snowplow ready, because northern Illinois, anyway, is going to see some significant snowfall.
Yes, sir.
This afternoon.
Yes,
Stay
sir.
safe.
For Dan McCaleb, this has been Chris Krug. You've been listening to the Illinois in Focus podcast. This was the Crosstalk segment, commentary and conversation powered by the Center Square. Now over to Greg Bishop for a look at what the Center Square will be working on next week.
Next week, both chambers of the Illinois legislature will return to begin piecing together Governor J.B. Pritzker's budget proposal and advance other legislation. The team from the Center Square will be on the ground to cover the latest there and continue to track any movements on litigation against Illinois' gun ban. This has been Illinois in Focus, a production of America's Talking Network. I'm Greg Bishop.